Are from Albertson Stadium, just outside Albertson Stadium. Ryan, Luke, and Lucas Gebhart here for IdahoSports.com. We're trying something a little bit new, you and I here. We're starting to get into a little bit of the podcasting game. So we thought, what better setting to do a recap of this last football season than of the last football game that's going to be played here in the Treasure Valley, whether that's high school or collegiate. We're here at the famous Idaho Potato Bowl just outside Albertson Stadium here in Boise. It's actually great weather considering
Beautiful.
Potato Bowl weather, what
Yeah.
it can be. About 40 degrees here in Boise, just a couple hours to kick off, and it's going to be Utah State and Georgia State. Sort of an unconventional matchup here.
Yeah.
We kind of get a Mountain West team pretty much every year in the Potato Bowl. Usually it's a MAC school. And this year, here we are with Georgia State. A lot of these kids have probably never even been to Idaho, let alone maybe even played a cold weather football game. But, it's sort of playing in their favor, I guess.
Well, and I had to laugh as we were pulling in. I saw a Georgia State fan, and he was in gym shorts and like a light hoodie. And I thought, man, just doesn't get like this down in Georgia for him, And like you said, Lucas, fantastic weather. And here we are with blue skies, considering we've been sucked in with fog. The inversion's been real.
Snowed last
night. And it's absolutely gorgeous today. A bit frigid, obviously, but players have to deal with that. And I was talking to my son. He said, Dad, is it going to be difficult for the players today? I said, honestly, when you're playing, you're hot. It's when you stop playing, right? And then the sweat and the cool and the chill kind of comes in. But, it's got to be fun for some of these Georgia kids to come and see a different part of the country, places they've never been before. Utah State, just down the road. Quite frankly, one of the reasons why we're highlighting this is because they have three Idaho kids on that Utah State roster, and they have typically recruited pretty well out of Idaho. And I think that you and I both know this is Idaho showing up more and more, Idaho high school football, and the kids are showing up more and more on the recruiting scene. Gatlin Bear this year, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the show. But just in general, it's a good scene. It's a good venue. I mean, you can see Utah State in the background, the equipment trunk as they made their way from Logan today, and we're just, like you said, trying something new. Good stuff.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get into it. We want to start with high school football. We'll start with some of the 2023 state champions. We'll start up at the 5A level. You and I do a ton of 5A games. We did the 4A state championship, which was actually here at Albertson Stadium. That was a crazy ending between Bishop Kelly and Hillcrest, but 5A a little bit different, I guess you could say, through this year. There wasn't really a clear-cut favorite. Yes, Eagle was undefeated throughout the whole year, but really just wasn't that runaway team that we've seen in years past, and it ended up kind of being Highland being the team that played on what was their former home turf. Coeur d'Alene had to come all the way down to Southeast Idaho to play in that state championship game, but Highland, an incredible year for them, and here's another state championship in Pocatello.
Yeah, and you talked about the clear-cut favorite, and Eagle was, and I'm going to say, probably going to go out on a limb here. I saw a lot of 5A games, but in terms of physically, we'll call it athletically gifted, and I didn't get to see Highland that much, so I may be, speaking a little bit out of turn because they did end up winning the state championship. But I would say Eagle probably was that team for a long time. They became, when they had a couple of injuries, Ramsey injured his foot in the first playoff game that they played, his ankle, and that kind of took him a little bit out of their two-headed quarterback game, and that took Eagle out and allowed for Coeur d'Alene to come in. And that defense, though, was absolutely phenomenal all year for the Eagle Mustangs. Now, on the other side of the state, we talk about Highland, and Highland only got beat by Meridian, which Meridian coming in was number one or number two in the state, depending. Last year, they were that clear-cut favorite, right? Like, they were that team, and a couple of mistakes in the state championship and a Luke Flowers, fantastic game right here at Albertson Stadium. And Rigby was able to repeat as state champions, even though, and I still say this, and this is zero disrespect to Rigby, the most talented and probably the best team did not win the state championship. The hottest team and the best coached on that day won the state championship.
Yeah, and you go back to last year and what Rigby did, 3 weeks in a row, all on the road, all in the Treasure Valley. They got out victories, and it kind of looked like that quarterfinals game that you and I did, Eagle and Rigby, again, here in the Treasure Valley. It almost seemed like it was, exactly the same as last year. But, you talk about an Eagle team, we were around that Eagle program a little bit this year. It sort of felt like they thought that was going to be their year.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Ramsey injury really just kind of put the brakes on that whole offensive system, because now they're one-dimensional. And Ramsey just brought so much of a different dynamic package to them, and the way they ran the ball with Noah Burnham. I mean, he's got to be one of the best running backs in the state, at least going into next year. Right?
Yeah.
And so, I really thought that Ramsey injury really hurt Eagle, because it just shrunk so much of what made them good offensively.
Yeah, and they were a more dynamic team with Ramsey in the offense, because when you're in the backfield and you have two, and this is nothing against Devin Harson. I mean, the kid actually has wheels. I mean, I've seen him run, and he can get out and run, but it's a different mentality when you're running the football. And Ramsey just kind of had that lean ahead just a little bit, see a crease and go. And Devin Harson was going to beat you to the edge. And Noah Burnham was a mix of both of those. And so a little bit of a different dynamic. But, Seth Brock coming in was one of the most dynamic and probably most versatile defensive players on the field, I would say, both sides. I mean, he caught footballs and he was knocking heads off. No offense, that was probably the wrong terminology. But, he was crashing. He was causing pressure, and he was the one that actually won the Rigby game for him, because he caused the pressure that Luke Flowers ended up throwing the interception on the last offensive play for Rigby. But, Eagle was that until they weren't, right? Yeah. Now, the flip side of that is, let's talk about Coeur d'Alene, right? Like, Coeur d'Alene just kind of came in. They got beat by Rocky early. They lost a couple of games, and everybody just wrote them off. But they just stayed consistent. The rest of the game, I mean, they played within themselves offensively. They didn't try to do too much. They knew they had a really solid defense, and that defense kept them in games. And they scored 7 points, and they won it. And they won the semifinals.
And they won it. Right. So,
semifinals.
Yeah.
So it was a unique way to get to the state championship game. That said, I almost kind of want to never write off North Idaho. I really do.
Especially when you have a program like that up there. Coeur d'Alene is always just Coeur d'Alene. That's a program that's one of those perennial 5A powers. We have some of them in the Treasure Valley. Obviously, Highland is another. Rigby kind of becoming one.
Is how many state championships do you need to win? But yeah.
And so you get a team like Coeur d'Alene and you get into the playoffs, and I really think that's when, for those, especially those upperclassmen, it's like, okay, we've been here before.
Yeah.
We know what this is. We know what state playoffs are. Now it's go time. Let's forget about weeks 1, 2, early September. Doesn't matter anymore.
Doesn't matter.
Programs like that truly kind of understand that kind of mentality, and especially when you have longtime head coaches too. I mean, that's
correct.
That's a big deal.
Well, yeah, and the consistency, running the same system year in and year out, and that you don't flip flop, and you have a kid that, I mean, quite frankly, you're identifying in 7th grade going, that kid's going to be my linebacker, or that kid's our future quarterback because he fits in my system. And I think that that's a reality that Coeur d'Alene deals with, and very similar to Rigby, right? Rigby, it's a one school town, right?
Yeah.
So everybody in the area is going to go to that area, to that specific school, give or take a couple transfers in or whatever. And that's kind of the same situation. Whereas you get into the Treasure Valley and there's a little bit more open enrollment. Who's going to go here? Who's going to do this and that? I look at Marcos Del Rio, who had a fantastic year, first team All-State running back for Meridian, and he started at Capital, right, and ended up at Meridian. That's just kind of the reality when it's more than it's a multi-school town, and so you kind of have to deal with it. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of talent to pick from for Meridian, Capital, some of the bigger schools in the state, but when you're in Rigby, Coeur d'Alene, I mean, I know there's Lake City's right there, but it's still pretty isolated in terms of you don't have a ton of options, right? That's your system that you're going to play through. The junior high uses the same system, or the middle school, whichever you have there. And then, maybe even some of the little leagues, the little Pop Warner tackle football leagues run the same system.
It's the same system from when you basically start football, fourth grade,
all the way through,
all the way up through senior year of high school. So, 5A I thought was a lot of fun. 4A on the other hand, a little bit of a different story at 4A. Bishop Kelly was just a juggernaut all year long.
All year.
And then you look at the Max Prep rankings, which if you want to have a discussion about Max Prep's ranking, Paul, Scott, Logan, they already did a podcast.
They did.
You could go check that one out. But Bishop Kelly was kind of sitting there as the number 2 seed going into the state playoffs, and they're like, what
do we need to do?
They just ran through every opponent, really, with maybe the exception of Emmett. But they kind of ran through their schedule, and here they are with the number 2 seed. Still got to play the state championship game in their hometown.
Yes.
So, I mean, that still kind of played in their favor. But state championship that Bishop Kelly to take something from the Idaho Statesmen, a championship they had to win twice.
Yeah. Mike was he called it. Yep.
And so that's kind of the best way, I think, to put that. And it was, they thought they had it won, and then you have back-to-back 2 15-yard penalties on the same play. One was a sideline warning, and then I can't remember what the other penalty was.
So the other one, when they tackled him, right?
Right.
The ball got knocked out, but at that point was the clock expired. Nobody knew, and so the kid just knocked it. I don't even know if he knocked it away, but it kind of got bumped away, and then they jumped up and celebrated, and then all these flags came out. They put time on the clock, and the rest is history.
And it was an audio broadcast, but it was while we were sorting it out, while we were up in the booth, they were Hillcrest is at about the 45 yard line, and you're thinking they're just gonna have to throw it up to the end zone. That's the only way they're gonna win this game. Now 30 yards of penalties later, they have the ball at the 9, and it's a makeable field goal.
And they missed it.
And they missed it. I mean, that was just one of the most chaotic endings to a state championship game that I have seen since my time at Idaho Sports. And, I've been doing it for almost 10 years now. Crazy how time goes by there, but, here we are. So, but you and I, we both seen a lot of high school state championship games over the years. To me, that ranks right up there as one of the instant classics in terms of a state championship.
I was tired, right? Like when I was done with it, I would say,
talked and we're tired.
I was just emotionally, I'm just spent on that one. The big question at the end of that one was, why not throw it to Isaac Davis, right? The 6'6", 6'7" stud. I was talking to a couple of the recruiting guys. We'll get into recruiting here in just a little bit. But I was talking to a couple of the recruiting guys, and they're like, I don't know why that kid's not a D1, Ohio State, Alabama tight end or defensive end recruit. I mean, that kid could play in the NFL, right? And he chose basketball, and good on him, right? He's going to go play at BYU. But he had a couple of throws, and it was hilarious. I mean, they had 4th and 15 and a 4th and 30. And on both of them, they threw the one up, and he caught one, right, for the first down for a big 4th down conversion. And this in the state championship.
Whole game, it was just Hillcrest. It was 4th and 30.
And they convert
it, right? And 4th and 15, got it. No
convert.
Problem. And so it just sort of felt like at the end of that game that they were
going to convert. Yeah, I know. Well, and it was tough too, because those kids in Eastern Idaho, and I was born in Idaho Falls. I would have gone to Shelley for all you folks watching, but I was born in Eastern Idaho, and that's it, man. They love sports. They are so passionate about it, and those kids were just devastated when they weren't able to do it, and likely so, because. And rightfully so, excuse me, because you have a Skyline team that's a perennial powerhouse, right? And you get over the hump of Skyline, and then you run into the BK hump, right?
Yeah.
Whereas last year, BK came in again undefeated. They played at Holt, ended up getting beat pretty badly. Unfortunately, there was a bout of the flu that went through the BK team right before the state championship last year, and Skyline was able to take advantage and beat them pretty handily. But to that point, Hillcrest gets past them, right? They're 11-0, and they get into the state championship game, and they run into another team.
Yeah, 4A to me was a fun one to follow from the top 5 teams, especially those Eastern Idaho teams.
Absolutely. Pocatello
was really good this year, and I thought had a couple things gone their way, Pocatello's way, when they played Bishop Kelly. Pocatello, I think, could have won that.
Could have,
if there were a play here in the second quarter that goes their way. If there's a play here in the first quarter, if they pick up this 4th down, and it just every time they kind of needed that play, kind of the opposite of what Rigby did last year. Every time they needed a play, Rigby got it.
Yeah.
Every time Pocatello needed to make that play, they didn't get it.
Yeah.
And so they just ended up losing by a couple scores. But Peter Minard, that running back for Bishop Kelly, I mean, he's
the player of the year out of Idaho. I mean,
yeah, right.
He absolutely was. I mean, that kid was phenomenal.
Yeah, he's probably player of the year, right?
Yeah.
And he's coming back again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's, Bishop Kelly. Here we go.
No, Minard's a senior.
Minard's a senior. That's right.
Yeah.
There's so many kids,
I know. Guys, we cover a lot of kids. I mean, quite frankly, you could go through every team and it's like, wait, junior, senior, freshman,
right.
I don't know.
Either way, I think Bishop Kelly is going to reload this thing, and Bishop Kelly is going to be right there at the end again next year too.
Well, they started a sophomore quarterback. Yeah. They had a freshman receiver in Boston Husky. They have a couple of linemen. They're going to need to reload on the offensive line. But again, it's that system, right? We talk about the systems. The systems work so well. And Bishop Kelly funnels a lot of kids through there. it's a Catholic school, but whether you're Catholic or not, the kids want to go to Bishop Kelly, and they do it for the right reasons. Great baseball program, basketball. They're actually playing pretty well this year too. Their women's sports, their Olympic sports, they do really well, and so Bishop Kelly draws and attracts a certain type of athlete. But to your point, I mean, look, Bishop Kelly may get somebody that they didn't know they were going to have, right? And it's because it's Bishop Kelly and they can attract that type of student. The flip side of that is you look over the east side of this. Well, actually, let's stay in the Treasure Valley, right? We know that Emmett's always going to give it a fight, right? They're going to be solid. Oh, actually, I think we haven't even addressed the elephant in the room, reclassification.
Yeah, that was where we were going next.
Yeah,
which changes the whole ball game kind of going into next year. So again, there will be 6 classifications, but we're redoing how we do the 6
the numeration of them. Yeah.
So we're going to add a 6A, which is basically now going to be
the 5A from this year.
Essentially, yeah, with the exception of, I think Middleton's going down. They're staying at 5A, I guess is the way you could put that.
No, Middleton in football is petitioning to stay up at 6A. Yeah, they want to stay at 6.
Okay.
But the rest of the sports,
there's
a statement. There you go. Yeah. No, in talking to the Middleton coaches, and they're friends of the program of Idaho Sports, but in talking to some of the coaches on the program, they want to stay there. They truly believe they can compete at that same level. I mean, they had a fantastic year. They went 8-3 this year.
Yeah. And
unfortunately, they ran into Rigby. And the only thing that I got the text message from the coach was, those guys are really good.
Yep.
That was it. I mean, they played a Rigby team that was getting hot. So, they just weren't quite there, but they were absolutely in the top 5 in the state by the end of the year.
Yeah. And so, let's just jump right into it now with this reclassification. 1A is you're not going to have 1A Division 1 and 1A Division 2. It's all going to be 1A. So you're going to have those 1A schools basically in one classification, 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A, and now 6A. And some of the lower enrollment current 5As will stay at 5A.
Uh-huh.
And some over like in the Magic Valley, like I think Canyon Ridge has the enrollment to be 5A, but they might be 4A.
Yeah.
There's lots to sort out there.
Yeah. Well, and some of the big ones are like Skyview has enrollment and they're on the border. Are they going to stay 5 or go 6A? Ridgeview is actually population-wise should be at the 6A. Are they going to stay and go? And you can look it up there. But quite frankly, it's not going to change the outcome of the top tier teams, right? The top tier teams are going to be the top tier teams. And you're looking at the we call them the 4 or the 5 here in the Treasure Valley. Rigby, Highland. Highland's actually one of the middle to smaller 5A schools. It's going to be now on the smaller end of the 6A schools. Highland will be.
Yeah.
Thunder Ridge stays up. Most of them are going to stay up. What they do lose is in North Idaho. So in North Idaho, you lose Moscow, goes down to 4, stays at 5A, doesn't jump. It's complicated, folks. Sorry. And then you also lose Lewiston. Lewiston stays down at 5A, just in terms of enrollment. So you're only going to have 3 teams that are going to be playing. Well, 2 actually, Lake City and Coeur d'Alene in that Inland Empire. And so they're going to do, again, a joint kind of combined 4A, 5A, 6A.
5A, 6A was 4A, 5A.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, that's what that looks like. Now, the rest of the way that it kind of rolls down as it comes down, your really small schools are just going to stay where they are. Your bigger schools in your classification bump up.
Yep. So that's going to start this next school year. So for the first time, we'll have a 6A state champion next year.
Well, so Highland won their last ever potential 5A, and BK won their last potential 4A.
Yeah, and so BK going up to 5A, they had won the most 4A state championships out of the history of 4A state championships. Now they bump up to 5A. So we'll obviously unpack all that throughout the summer. Like we said, a lot of stuff to sort out between petitions, enrollment numbers, who's staying where, who's petitioning up, who's petitioning down. A lot to sort out there. So let's talk about recruiting.
Let's do it.
Signing day just happened. Obviously, the elephant in the room in recruiting is Gatlin Bear.
Yeah.
Had originally committed to Boise State. Gatlin Bear receiver from Burley High School, 4-star recruit, getting lots of attention nationally. I was actually at a work conference a couple weeks ago, and I tend to golf at work conferences. So
terrible job.
We were on a golf course, and I was golfing with somebody from Louisiana, and I was just talking about how there's this kid, his name's Gatlin Bear. He's super good. He's getting looks from all these big schools. And he goes, oh, yeah, I know what that is.
Yeah.
A kid from Louisiana, who was about my age, probably upper 20s, early 30s, knew who Gatlin Bear was. And that's just kind of what a recruit like that kind of does to your state.
Does.
And he had the pick of the litter. I mean, it was pick a Power 5 school. They essentially offered him. He had originally committed to Boise State. That was back when Andy Avalos was the head coach. That obviously no longer the case. And during that coaching change, while Boise State was able to retain some of their current guys, we kind of sort of think through that firing of Andy Avalos, they did lose Gatlin Bear through that coaching change. So now Gatlin Bear appears the two that he is considering right now, Oregon and Michigan. And Oregon obviously going to the Big Ten. Michigan obviously a Big Ten school right now. And the connection you have with Michigan, Colston Loveland, who is an Idaho kid obviously as well. And playing. And
contributed, scored a touchdown
right
in the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, and, playing and catching touchdown in big spots too.
Mm-hmm.
Had a long touchdown catch in the shoe at Columbus, last year in the Ohio State-Michigan State game. So that's always fun to watch when you have Idaho kids contributing on big stages like that. Michigan's going to play for a national championship this year.
Potential. They're in the playoffs.
Okay, sure.
They ran into Alabama, which that's a whole different story. But
he'll play in the college football playoff, and then if they win, they'll play for a national championship, which, college football playoff, that's a whole other conversation, but just cool to see Idaho kids competing on that stage. So basically down between two for Gatlin Bear, Oregon or Michigan. Yeah.
And again, it's not like I'm some kind of incredible insider, but I do know a few people, and their take is he's going to Michigan.
Yeah.
But he did visit Oregon. I mean, they're 100% convinced that he's going to go. Well, the insiders are, and I'm not going to mention any names because I don't know if he wants me to. But let's just say he works for a company that starts with there's a 2 at the beginning of it and a 47 in the middle of it, and it ends with sports. And he just says that he thinks that he's going to Michigan, and for whatever reason, I don't know. I don't know the Bear family at all. Now, this is all we can say, all we want, but the truth is he's going to serve a 2-year LDS mission. Right. He doesn't have his mission call yet. And that's going to, whether that affects it or not, his brother served a 2-year mission at the Catholic University of Arkansas. Right. So some of the questions are, when you do this mission thing, when you come back, do you lose any of the athleticism? This is a 10-1-500 guy.
Yeah. I mean,
10-1-5.
If you guys don't know anything about track, that's fast.
So let's put it this way. If you're being recruited and you break 11 seconds and you put it on your Instagram or your on X or whatever, like, hey, I ran a 10-8-9, right? All of a sudden, college coaches are like, this kid's got something, right? This is legit. Now, this kid's a 10-1-5, and he runs away with it. Just Google Gatlin Bear 100 meters and just watch him. Just unbelievable the way he flies away from kids. Yeah. And he's not small either. He's all of 6'2". Some people lie on their height, And then, like, I remember when I was playing, there was a kid that was 5'10" and he was 6'1" on the roster. And I'm like, there is no way that kid.
No way.
He is legit 6'2". He was a long jumper. He quit that just to focus on track. He's actually not going to run track this year. Nothing left to prove for him. I mean, I guess you break 10, but that's not his focus. But he is going to stick in the football realm, get healthy. He did hurt his shoulder, but it didn't have an impact. Initially, they thought it was a torn labrum. Ended up just being a mild, sprain. He was out a couple of weeks, came back. But I mean, cream of the crop in terms of stars, glitz, and glamour, but there are some really good kids. I mean, we look at Rakeem Johnson, and pointed to my computer because we pulled it up. Rakeem Johnson following the head coach of Oregon State to Michigan State. That's a huge get for Idaho. Now you have a kid in the Big Ten, right? And he's probably going to play. He played a huge role.
He's got Big Ten size too.
He does.
Is the other thing, and he's listed as a 3-star recruit here as we look at it too. And Michigan State that's a program that's prides itself on its defense, cold weather games, football kind of deal.
He's coming from the right state.
Right. And so that's sort of what we've seen when these kids like this kind of come out of Idaho. Taysom Hill plays for the New Orleans Saints. Great example of it.
Yeah.
Do everything type of player, do those little things, be the toughest kid on the field. And I think you're seeing exactly that with Rakeem Johnson. And there was rumors he might be going to Oregon State. Follows the coach. Makes sense. And what happened to Oregon State and Washington State
I don't blame him.
I don't either.
I mean, I feel terrible. Honestly, I truly feel terrible. I used
Yeah.
for work, I used to cover Corvallis and talk about a very devout fan base, right? And they love their Beavers, and they just redid Research Stadium, and it's absolutely gorgeous. There's a lot of good things, but you're homeless.
Yep.
And now this is your rival, and it
Yeah.
should be. I mean, Oregon State, Boise State. I point because the stadium, folks, is right there.
Yeah, we're looking at it right here.
Boise State's going to be your rival for the next foreseeable future. We'll see what that looks like. The bigger question, some of these smaller market teams, we'll call it Washington State too, is the money, right? The revenue.
Yep.
It's just not going to have it. There is a parachute lining. There's a silver lining for them. All that revenue that came in from all the NCAA wins from the past 5 or 7 years, I can't remember, in the tournament from all the Pac-12 schools, that revenue does get shifted down to that. So that is going to make up the gap in terms of financing athletic departments for Oregon State, Washington State. And those have historically been really good landing spot for Idaho kids, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you look at Camden DeGraw, the defensive end out of Coeur d'Alene. By the way, we forgot to talk about him, but played a fantastic game too. He committed and he signed with Washington State. So, and that's just right around the corner. What is that, an hour and a half from his house, 2 hours maybe?
Yeah.
Tops.
I mean,
and so, it's been a really good, those two schools have been really good to Idaho kids. And I'd love to see them continue with the ability to play big-time football.
Yeah, and, speaking of Idaho kids and going near home, about Trevor McKenna, Bora defensive lineman, Boise State commit. I mean, I think that's a good get for Boise State.
Yeah.
I think he's a really good defensive lineman, has some good speed coming off that edge. And anytime you have not only Idaho kids, but local Boise kids, and it's as local as it gets, Boise School District with him.
Bora High School.
So, yeah, right down the road.
I was talking to Trevor McKenna's dad, and he's all 6'6". Dad's 6'4". He says he feels small next to his son, but 6'6". And, they said they're going to put him up around. They want to be about 290, 295, and they want to play him defensive tackle. They like his athleticism. We're talking Boise State right now. And so they're looking at him doing somewhat like a Scott Matlock type interior where you can, you're all over the field. Matlock had those really quick feet and he created chaos and havoc. And so they think that McKenna might be one of those players for him. But I love it. I mean, homegrown talent. Playing Boris, had a decent year, considering they're outside of the top 5 teams in the Treasure Valley. But Bora, I think, showed up really well, and Trevor McKenna was one of those reasons why they did show up.
Yeah, and McKenna again listed here as a 3-star recruit. So again, good athlete going to Boise State, staying home. We always love to see that. We talked about him a little bit earlier. Luke Flowers, quarterback, going to Montana.
Yeah,
he's the Rigby quarterback. I like that a lot.
Love it
for Montana.
Oh,
I think he could play early.
Yeah,
and I think that Montana. I mean, they were one of the best teams in FCS this year.
The national championship game, right?
Still currently playing, right? And Montana is one of those markets in Missoula. Cat Grizz rivalry. That's one of the best.
It's huge.
Game day's gone there.
Man, Montana college football is fantastic right now.
And so I just love that. I know that he had gotten some looks from some bigger schools, but the transfer portal to me has changed everything. So I look at this situation for a guy like Luke Flowers. He could go there and light it up for a couple of years. And then if he wants to transfer, or he has the ability to transfer, he can do that.
Yeah.
And I really think that's what the transfer portal has really changed the game in the recruiting spectrum. I think there's all this noise about how it's only benefiting the top tier teams. I don't necessarily think that's true, because if you're a kid like Luke Flowers, you're a 3-star recruit, you can go to a place like Montana and you could play early. And even if you only play for a couple of years, that's fine.
Well, so the transfer portal should just be now called the starting point, right? So wherever you sign on signing day in your first year and you're there, it theoretically feels like a starting point, and that's okay, right? I don't love it. I think there needs to be this is just Ryan's opinion, right? A 2-year commitment minimum, because the turnover and the flopping is so much. And once you get past the initial 2-year gap, then you'll still have the same amount of people in the transfer portal. But I think it also will correct a couple of things. I think the biggest thing is if you don't get your shot 1 year, maybe you'll have to stick it out for 2. You may get your shot in the second year and retain you at that school. But if we're getting back, and I digress, but I'm talking to Luke Flowers, again, talking to the recruiting gurus. He was at a passing camp down in California, and the Arizona coaches, Jeb Fisher, saw him, and was like, "Okay, offer this kid. Where's he from?" Didn't even know where he's from. Didn't even know he was from Idaho. He had no
Rigby,
clue.
Idaho, done.
Yeah, done, right? Like, let's offer this kid. But he comes from a good coaching tree. Dad was a high school coach, and now he's the offensive coordinator in Rigby over there. And so he comes from a good football background. In fact, little brother now is going to be the quarterback for we'll have another Flowers at Rigby, so get ready for some more fireworks. But I think that's a good get. And if you're playing, and to me, honestly, anymore, this really doesn't matter. He's a 3-star recruit. Montana gets 3-star recruits now, right? It used to didn't be that way. It used to be, hey, you know what? These guys are picked over, or some kid coming out of a JC, then you would go play at an FCS school. Nowadays, the competition level at the FCS level is such.
It's good.
It's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, the top tier teams, we're talking Montana, South Dakota State, North Dakota, Idaho. I mean, they go in and they beat FBS teams regularly, and they do it looking good.
Yeah, and Idaho is a good example of that, and how quickly that turnaround has happened with their head coach and Jason Eck had a chance to beat Cal. Cal this year.
Cal.
And so
Cal played in a bowl game just a few days ago.
Right. And this was back when we thought Cal might only win a couple games this year, but 6-6, Cal made a bowl game this year. And so, I especially the Big Sky Conference this year, Montana was
phenomenal.
Could play.
Phenomenal.
Could win a national championship this year. Idaho was really good. Montana State's usually pretty good.
Montana State last year played in the national championship.
Sacramento State, another one.
Really good.
So the Big Sky Conference had some legitimate teams.
Yes.
This year, and I love when we see Idaho kids, especially as highly ranked as these 2-3-star kids, pick those kind of top tier FCS schools and still play regionally. Because Montana State will sell out every single game next year.
Montana too.
Montana will. Yeah. Montana will too.
Yeah.
And that is not a small stadium.
Yeah.
That stadium's got to hold about 30,000 people or so. And it's the same thing with Montana State. And find me a better rivalry in our region than Montana State.
It doesn't get any better.
Exactly.
It doesn't get any better.
So and Missoula is a great town. I just love the state of Montana. I can't say enough about them. But my point, I love that get from Montana. I love that fit. I think that's a really good fit.
Well, the last thing I will say is Montana allows him to be able to come with a football FBS level body. He's on the leaner side, a little light side right now, but gaining some of that strength and being in that college strength and conditioning program where he gets, adds to that 6'1" frame, and all of a sudden, he's up around 200 pounds. That looks a little bit different than 170 pounds.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, other players on this list, as we kind of scroll down through it, we're starting to get into some of the 2-star ranges. Seth Brock, we talked about.
3-star kid, though.
Yeah, 3-star kid, Montana State.
There you go.
There's another one. He's an Eagle High kid. Listed. He could go probably tight end or defensive end, depending on how they kind of see him. I don't know what exactly.
Well, they recruited him as a defensive end, right?
Okay,
and I saw how disruptive he is. But he is athletic enough to maybe be that outside linebacker. But I really like him on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
Because he seeks and destroys, right? He catches the ball and he's looking for contact. Plus, he has basketball-ish background in terms of like boxing out kids and players and getting positioning. And he did a lot on the offensive side of the ball, dynamic, and he's explosive.
Yeah. I mean, just when you look up and down this list, pretty strong class, I really think, coming out of Idaho. Obviously, not every year you got a 4-star kid, but you got 7, 8, 9, close to 10, maybe a little shy of 10, to about 10 3-star.
3 stars,
coming out of here too. 3 stars, nothing to shake.
I take it. Yeah, I was not a 3-star recruit. I will tell you that much.
Right. So as we look down through, is anyone else that stands out here that you want to hit on?
Yeah, a couple of them. Number one, Devin Harsin going to Idaho State. Right. I think Devin Harsin has to grow into a system, and I think Cody Hawkins, that he has done a good job in year one. I mean, they won 3 games, almost four games. They did a good job. And so I look for that program to rebound. That program has potential. And I think Devin Harsin could be a fit in that system if coached right. Harsin has the arm. We saw it, right?
Yeah.
Threw really well, threw really hard. Now he needs to work on some downfield touch and a little bit more of the timing routes. And if he does that, I think he has the tools to do it. Obviously, dad played quarterback, former coach here.
Yeah.
Couple more we're going to talk about. There were a couple that I wanted to look through. Some of the other ones that don't get as much play are, and I'm a little biased because I do broadcast work for the College of Idaho, but they went to the semifinals, and they lost to the eventual national champions, and they could have won. They didn't punch a fourth and goal from the 1 yard line in. If they would have done that, they were right there. But NAIA football and College of Idaho here in the Valley is an incredible option. There are a lot of Montana schools, so you see a lot of the offers that they're getting. A lot of these Idaho kids are getting offers from these because they can recruit. We have good football. And in talking to when I say good football, I'm saying the state of Idaho, and we're putting out recruits. You just talked about 10, well, let's call it 9 3-stars and 1 4-star. But the question is, and this is interesting because I was talking to, again, my contact for a company, and we were talking about Idaho high school football, and he basically said, listen, there's no stud next year. There's no dude that just blows. But the depth in terms of who you're getting, you get more 3-stars, right? Yeah. You get more high 2-stars, 3-stars than we've seen in the past. And I think that we're seeing that on the field throughout Idaho high school football. I mean, Leighton Vander Esch, when he played, that was a freak. That was an athletic.
That was a dude.
That was a dude, right? That was a phenom that came out of Riggins, and he came and he just started here, and there was no questions asked. He had to prove himself here, right? He didn't start instantly. But I think that you're starting to now see more of these depth guys, right? Like the Rakeem Johnsons, the Luke Flowers. Last year, Nathan Reynolds went on. He actually played a lot, and we were going to try and get him on the show today. He texted me, said, "I'm sorry, he can't make it today." I said, "No worries, buddy." But played at Idaho State, like depth in terms of what we're seeing. Another one that we saw, and you and I, when we did this game, or did you do the game with me? But was Shea Robertson, right, from Coeur d'Alene. Yeah, we did the game. I mean, versus Eagle in that semifinal, and he was all over the field. That is a huge pickup from Eastern Washington, which not too long ago.
Another Big Sky school.
Exactly.
And, playing on the red field.
Yeah.
So it's so cool to see these, especially these regional schools start to take notice. And, I watch a lot of Boise State games here, obviously, because we live here. But Boise State, oftentimes it's, kids from California, a lot of these other areas. And there's sort of a knock on them. It's like, well, why aren't you going after Idaho kids? Well, they are. They got Trevor McKenna. They had Gatlin Bear in their back pocket.
Yeah.
Before he slipped out of there with the coaching change. But, don't think that as we go through this list, that as we list off Montana, Eastern Washington, Montana State, Michigan State, don't think that these Idaho colleges aren't taking notice and offering these kids. They just aren't landing all of them.
Well, and here's a good example of that. Luke Lucchini from last year, right, from Rocky. He got a preferred walk-on at University of Washington. Guess what University of Washington's doing this year? Right, they're playing in the semifinals, right? They were the last Pac-12 champion to live, and they're out there. But he had offers from Idaho, Idaho State, Boise State offered him. I'm not sure if it was a preferred walk-on or not, but he chose to do that. I mean, I don't blame him, right? He's looking out for himself, and he will play. Mark my words, kid's a baller.
Yeah.
A lot of hustle. And that Rocky program, turned out just a bunch of kids. Which, by the way, we should talk about him. Jackson, I can't forget his last name. He's a sophomore. He's an all-state selection. He's a guard. He's 6'3", 250-ish now. Last year he played at 240.
There you go.
And nasty. The kid would pull, and you'd see him around the corner. And if I were a linebacker or defense, I'd be like, dang it, he's coming after me again. But he'll be their next big recruit. But moral of the story is you're right? Like these kids are now getting offers. They're being able to look outside of just the state of Idaho, and they're going all over the place to some really good football schools.
Yeah, and that was kind of where I was going with this. Is you look up and down this list, and there's some really good programs, not only Big Ten, Pac-2, I guess now, or the Mount West Alliance, whatever you want to say. But if they're going FCS, they're going to good FCS teams, and that is really what's kind of standing out to me about it. And we'll go ahead and talk about what Idaho FCS schools now. Idaho obviously has really turned a corner.
Yes.
Now and one of the best FCS schools. Idaho State, on the other hand, that's my alma mater. Go Bengals. Sometimes it's tough to root for the Bengals, but Cody Hawkins, I think, has given that program a little bit of hope, and a new president is coming into Idaho State, which always changes things, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse when it comes to athletics. But new president, second-year head coach going into next year, won 3 games this year. That's about a little above average, maybe for Idaho State
Unfortunately,
recently.
That's the truth.
You know?
Well, hey, listen, the other thing too is Pauline Theros, who's
Yeah.
the AD there, has done a fantastic job building all of the programs, right? So the women's volleyball team solid, the basketball team, the women's solid, basketball team solid. Brought in Cody Hawkins, had the faith to do that, to bring him in. You know, I give some credit to her, and she's very active in the program, you know, in the community of athletic directors, and you know, she's a former coach and player, and so she knows her stuff. But to your point, I just feel, and Idaho State has historically recruited, you know, the leftovers from California, the transfer kids that can't play. Now they're starting to get, first time they signed 15 kids this year.
They're starting to get some kids, and they're starting to get some Idaho kids.
Yes.
Too, which is what I loved about the Cody Hawkins hire.
Yes.
When they made that last year.
BK kid.
BK kid. Yep. So, I mean, his dad, Dan Hawkins, obviously coached at Boise State. And then went to, you know, University of Colorado. Cody played at University of Colorado. So, you know, the pedigree that he has and what his dad has done in his coaching career, but to have those Idaho roots, that's something that I think has been missing from that position for years. And to have that root, those Idaho roots, where he can go into a living room and say, you know, I was an Idaho kid. I get it. You know, I get it. Bishop Kelly, not quite the same as if you're recruiting, you know, a Rigby or a.
But you lived here.
But
this is where you went to high school.
And he's an Idaho native, you know, graduated from an Idaho high school. And I think that resonates a lot when they're going after these Idaho kids. And it shows. I mean, they got Harson, who's, you know, an Eagle High quarterback. You know, his kid played at Boise State. I mean, there's so many parallels with that signing. So I really think that, you know, that program's going to continue to build over the next few years. And Idaho State has always been this job where that coach is going to be there for 3 or 4 years.
If he's good, he's gone. If he's bad, he's gone.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think, you know, Cody Hawkins is kind of the perfect hire for that next 3 to 4 year span. And I'm excited to see where it goes. You know, they kind of hung with San Diego State earlier in the year.
Yeah.
Had a big come from behind win against Eastern Washington, which we didn't talk about them when we were rattling off all the big
that's a quality
that's a good program.
Fairly recent national championship.
Yeah, and you know, Cooper Kupp, obviously, he's an Eastern Washington grad.
Yeah.
He's doing okay.
A little bit. So. Well, and think about even last year. So Cody Hawkins got a haul. He got Ryan Corder from Meridian, stud linebacker. But I think the cream of that was Nate Reynolds, right? Yeah. I mean, we saw him all the way through. He was returning kicks. He was the punter. He was, you know, stud linebacker. He played tight end. And he got on the field this year, and he turned down offers from other schools to go play at Idaho State because Hawkins pitched him. Right? Hawkins pitched him and said, "Hey, be part of this and grow this with us. And I want you as a centerpiece to this." And he was able to do that. And that's, you know, that's part of what he's doing at the program. And I love it. I think it's fantastic for Idaho State.
Yeah. And, you know, that's always been a program, and that's always been a job to where it's going to take a year or two.
It will.
It's going to. It's just the nature of the job. But on the flip side, University of Idaho, another great year from them. I love what Jason Eck's doing up there in Moscow. They continue to go after and get Idaho recruits. They keep doing it. They did it again this year, and they are just kind of knocking on the doorstep a little bit of playing for an FCS national championship.
Yeah. Problem is they're gonna suffer because if you're a good FCS player, there's a place for you in the FBS, right? Sure. So they had 2 transfers out, quarterback and a running back, which is difficult. But at the same time, if you're in a program and you have a program and everybody believes that, and there's competition at the position, it's going to push you. And the guy that's stepping in and taking your spot is more than likely capable, right? And if you're a coach, and it sucks, right? You hate to lose your guy, but it stinks. You shouldn't use that word on broadcast. It stinks. But at the same time, I want the kid that wants to be there. Yeah, I do, because he is willing to do what I say versus the other kid that's saying, you know, and I'm not saying this is the case with everybody. If there's a fantastic offer and you have an opportunity, and we haven't even gotten to NIL, right? NIL is a whole different ball game. But if you have an offer to go play, I understand that. But I also do want the kids that want to be there.
Yeah. And, you know, I think going off of that, the way what your locker room is just matters so much. Boise State, fantastic example of that this year. You know, kind of struggling in terms of Boise State standards. I think if you're 500, there's tons of programs across the country that'll take that all day long. Boy, not really the case here at Boise State. They end up letting Andy Avalos go, and as soon as they played that game against Utah State with Spencer Danielson, their interim head coach, and to watch them fly around and to watch them play the way they did, they're winning the Mountain West.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just crazy to me that you have a program that fires its coach and still wins its conference.
Well,
That's just crazy.
It is. It's baffling. And I don't want to say too much against Andy Avalos, because I know, number one, there are a lot of really big fans of Avalos, and I know he's done some great work and he's contributed greatly to the program. When he was at Oregon, he ran a tough-nosed defense, did a good job. That said, I will say there are certain coaches that aren't for everybody.
Sure.
And I feel like maybe that had possibly run is course at Boise State, and to the point where he some of the kids were like, I just don't know if it's a good fit anymore. I mean, there were a couple of kids that hit the transfer portal, they said they were going to hit the transfer portal, and he wasn't a fit for them and they weren't a fit for him. And it's not saying that player was the make or break or end all be all, not the case. But as soon as he left and, there was a rallying cry and they were able to get behind it, it's amazing the momentum that you could get from that move alone. Like you said, you change the head coach, and it's nothing against Avalos. He could be the guy too. Say he goes and does the same thing at another program. He could be that guy, but it's just with Danielson and able to shift that momentum and somewhat of the mindset. I think that you saw just a byproduct of that.
Yeah. And, that was sort of where I was going with that. As soon as you have, okay, something's different, it's that switch. And now it's, these guys are playing for each other. We're playing for the head coach. And in terms of Boise State, from what I obviously don't play for Boise State, but from what I've heard, Spencer Danielson, players love him. The players just love playing for him. And when because they did a nationwide search for this head coach, and they ended up, you had to pick him. It was how do you not pick him?
You just won the match, which since 2019,
right?
And you had 10-2 years, 10-2 years in there. You still didn't win the Mountain West.
Right, exactly. And so they win the Mountain West. They go play in the LA Bowl, which I'm really curious to see how they play in that game. If Taylor Green doesn't transfer,
you're right. I was just going to say that. Or
Madsen's healthy.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah.
And so that was kind of in the case with Taylor Green, kind of just up another level from what we were just talking about from FCS to FBS. Now you're going Mountain West to SEC. Taylor Green going, well, if I'm going to have to compete for a job at the Mountain West, I might as well go compete for the same job in the SEC.
SEC, yeah.
You can't blame him for doing that. So, but Boise State, obviously kind of a history of recruiting good quarterbacks. You got Brett Ripp and Kellen Moore.
Yep.
They play young at Boise State.
Well, Hank Bachmeier played young for a long time too. Yeah.
So I think they're going to be just fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Madsen, it's interesting. I did a Madsen game in Utah when I was doing some games in Utah, and it was American. He went to American Fork High School, and I saw, and he was playing West High School, which that's weird. One's in Salt Lake and one's in Utah County, but they have a bit of a rivalry because they've knocked each other out of the state playoffs a couple of times. And I saw him play, and it was kind of magical, right? Like he's vertically challenged. He is 5'10". I will tell you that much, maybe. But he just has such field vision. And so I hadn't seen him really play since then until this year, obviously when he got his opportunity here. And that magic's there, right? Like he gets out of the pocket and he'll throw to a spot and let the receiver run to it. He creates stuff with his legs. So, they're going to be just fine, right? I love Taylor Green. BYU was looking at Taylor Green. They even offered him kind of like a Hail Mary, like, hey, if you want to come here, we'll work with you. Yeah. I have my own opinions on that. I'm a BYU guy. But the point is he has talent, right? His upside is phenomenal. And Boise State landed him.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you look at something like this too. And, Boise State is one of those programs that 6-7 wins. Bad year at Boise State. Bad year.
8 wins and you win the conference championship.
Yeah.
Bad year.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I think for Boise State's sake, I think as they start to go into this new era of college football where now you could play and win for a national championship with the way the college football playoff is now going with the expansion to 12 teams, and you got to take a group of 5 team.
Got it.
And, eventually I think college football, obviously is eventually moving to a 16 or 32 team playoff, much like we see at the FCS. I think it's going to take some time to get there.
Yeah.
But I think eventually that's kind of the way they got to go. And, how fitting for this setting, what's kind of preventing them from going that direction is
bowl games. Well, I mean, they did the Band-Aid, which is we'll just make the bowl games the playoff game, right? Yeah. I get it. It's not the same, right?
Yeah.
Because think about it. Montana plays somebody at home. They have to go up to Missoula. There was a time when Missoula did not have stadium lights. They had to play all their games early.
Really?
And if you got this late in the season, those games would get cold and they would get dark. And I remember it was in the late 90s, maybe early 2000s, and Montana was playing a game. It was on ESPN. I remember watching that thing, and I was like, I can barely see these guys. How are they playing it? And obviously, they've installed lights since then. But, that's that home field advantage. And I think if you were to flip that and go FBS level and start having teams playing bowl games like the LA Bowl. Look, SoFi Stadium's amazing. I mean, I wouldn't mind going there right now myself, right? That said, who travels there, right? Like, we're at a bowl game. It's fun because you're seeing Utah State fans and Georgia State fans, and I not mention the guy that didn't realize that Boise's apparently cold because he was in gym shorts. But I mean, it's a good time and it's fun, but at the same time, it's not the same as having a home game. And if you win and you deserve and you earn the opportunity to play a home game, that can go a long way in terms of your championship run.
Yeah, and it's just sort of a weird transition era, I think, for college football, because you have these bowl games that 10 years ago meant something.
Yeah.
And now there's
opt-outs, people don't play.
Or you hit the transfer portal and
before
the bowl game. And, I get it of why you have the deadlines of signing day and a transfer portal where you're almost working on next year before this year is over. I get why they have it because, you get to campus early, that sort of thing. I get it, but it just sort of comes at the expense of bowl games being what they used to be.
Yeah.
Right. And so, not to say that, this is obviously a fun environment, giving out free French fries around the corner and the experience that these kids have had in Boise throughout this week. Like I said at the top, we have kids from Georgia who probably never been to Idaho before or from the Southeast. Tubing up at Bogus Bay State.
Yeah, how cool is that?
I went to the Idaho Steelheads game last night with my wife, and there were Utah State players who were at the game. They were staying at the Grove Hotel, which is attached to the arena downtown. So you have Utah State players. Ironically, they were playing Utah.
So the
Steelers were playing the
Grizzlies.
So it's kind of fun. They had their own little cheering section for Utah. Giving out food to the Idaho Food Bank. Both these teams did that earlier this week. So bowl games is still a really fun student athlete experience, which is kind of what college football and college athletics is really all about. So I like how they still kept that. But, obviously the game element is just I think it'll figure itself out. But it's just sort of this weird little transition era as we playoff or we bowl games,
Yeah, and quite frankly, I don't know how long FBS stands as is. I mean, what we may look like is the SEC versus the Big Ten, and you have 2 16-team teams, and then you have that's like the NFL, 32 teams, and they form their own and they hold their own superpower. I don't know if the same teams that are in right now would be in that. I mean, Vanderbilt,
sure.
Yeah, and I'm not, a couple other ones in the Big Ten and whatever.
Conference realignment.
Yeah, you're in conference realignment. You pull the Florida States in. You maybe grab a Clemson. You do a couple things. I could see, and then the other one is relegation, right? So you do the relegation situation, and so I think that might be something that's coming down the pipeline. As is right now. Look, NIL has changed everything. We have a few more minutes, so we're going to wrap this up. And I will say this: it will figure itself out. And I was talking to my dad on the phone about this, and I said, basically, this is what it boils down to. If the kid's not producing, then you realize your investment's not that good, right?
Yeah.
And so my dad said, well, is it the coach that says, hey, don't pay this kid any more money? I said, I think it's mutual, right? I mean, the way that who I've talked to, it basically works like this. Who's going to be a stud this year on your team? I have $150,000 I need to spend, right? That I'm going to spend, and it's going to be through your university. I really like X, Y, and Z. You know what? This kid, no. Don't spend him. So I think that eventually works itself out. Do you remember the Matt Rule when he said a good quarterback's anywhere from $1 to $2 million a year? He's not that far off, right? I don't know if Taylor Green's getting $1 to $2 million. Again, he's going to compete for a spot on that team. I don't know.
Let's say he wins the spot.
But say he wins the spot. What does that mean? Right. Arkansas is a proud program, and so it makes a difference. Boise State, Again, we're not a huge market here in Boise. We're a lovely market. We're best place I've ever lived. I lived all over the country, from Eastern Idaho, lived in Salt Lake, Phoenix, Seattle, Dallas, DC, Brazil. I've lived all over the place, and this is my favorite. That said, I don't know what the NIL money look at being thrown at Boise State. There's a question. How competitive can you be if you do not have that NIL money? And I think that that's a question moving forward for a lot of these teams.
Yeah, and I think, especially in terms of being a Mountain West school, Boise State historically, I think, has recruited very well.
Mm-hmm.
They have competed with formerly Pac-12 schools. They've been in the conversation with those schools. NIL, can Boise State compete? I think they can bring something to the table. Can you bring the same amount to the table as an Oregon, who's working with a Nike, or
you can't.
Exactly.
You can't. What does that do to your recruiting?
Right.
You got to love Boise and love the game.
Yeah, and so I think Boise is obviously a fantastic city. Anyone who's been here knows that. So I sort of think you're going to start seeing teams that can't quite compete up with this NIL money. So do you want to go to, I don't know, Fayetteville, Arkansas, wherever, Pullman, Washington, or do you want to come and have the best 4 years of your life in this awesome city?
Awesome city.
And I think you're going to start to see that sort of creep in. It's always been there, but I think that's might creep in a little bit more too.
Yeah, I totally agree. And at the end of the day, you got to play with the players that want to be on the field for you.
Yeah.
And that's where a good coaching, a good recruiting, and make no mistake, I tell you, it's been interesting to see and talk to some of these coaches, and the pitches that they're giving kids year round now, right? Like it is a year long.
Recruit a kid, now you have to recruit to keep the kid.
To keep the kid.
I mean, we
went through some of the kids here, and Utah State has 3 kids from Idaho. They have who are the 3 kids? Let's go. I just wrote them down. Did I text you?
Let's get them up.
Let's get them up here. Yeah. They have Dallin Walker, played at Owyhee. They have Fitzgerald, that played at Thunder Ridge. And then they have Quentin Riley, that played at Meridian, the receiver. And he was really fantastic. It was good for him. So you have 3 kids. That's Utah State's similar in terms of recruiting as Boise State, right? Boise State's a little bit more robust. Boise's a little more robust than, say, Logan, but they're going to have to deal with the same thing. Honestly, the whole Mountain West is going to have to deal with the same thing, recruiting these kids. But that's why kids from Idaho that we know can play, that we've seen play, are now getting those looks, right? Because you have to get a kid that's hungry to play. We know these Idaho kids bring a lot. The growth in Idaho has really elevated the level of play at the high school level. And they're wanting to go. I mean, a lot of good 3-star recruits are going to FCS schools because they're hungry to get playing time.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole thing with it too. And I think it's not only benefiting the top schools. I do think some of the smaller schools are also benefiting from it in a different way.
Totally.
And so there's our 2 cents on it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Ryan and I kind of dreamt this up like 3 days ago, and we kind of threw it together sort of in the course of about 24 hours or so. So maybe we'll do some more of these throughout the summer and into the winter. I know you and I both kind of cover this stuff pretty much year round. So So thanks for being here, but let's go get some fries.
Let's do it. Hey, Famous Idaho Potato Bowl. Catch it on ESPN later today. If you're not today, you should watch us. I actually think we have some pretty good information, and if you're just driving or you want to watch something, put it on the background. This would be something to do too. So, as a podcast, it's a live podcast.
So, all right. He's Ryan Luke. I'm Lucas Gebhart. We'll see you later for Idaho Sports.
We'll check and see if we're cut off.